Colin Aldrich never expected this. It seemed that everything was going great in his life. 6 months ago, he received a promotion at work and, as a result, a good increase in salary. Celia's interior design business took off, and she was now making a significant contribution to the family budget. The house they bought 2 years ago wasn't luxurious, but it was big enough for their needs and in a good area. Recently, he and Celia began discussing the possibility of starting a family. So he wasn't looking for trouble when it hit him in the face. Colin couldn't help but notice an unfamiliar car parked in front of his house, but he wasn't bothered by its presence. What bothered him was that, upon entering from the garage, he saw Celia sitting in the living room next to another man. When he entered the room, she immediately stood up, and Colin couldn't help but notice how slender and attractive she looked. But it was only when he focused on her face that he saw how nervous she was. "Hello, darling," she greeted. She then pointed to the man who was still sitting on the couch. "You remember Vince Callahan," she said. "He's a client of mine. I remodeled his office. You've already met." "Oh yes, now I remember." "Hi, Vince. Good to see you again. What brings you here?" Vince gave Celia an awkward look, and she cleared her throat. "Damn, this is so hard," she said quietly. Then she took a deep breath, as if trying to prepare herself for the upcoming test. "Darling, there's no other way I'm leaving you." These words made no sense to him. "What did you say?" She shook her head sadly. "I know this is a shock to you, but I have filed for divorce." He barely reached the chair opposite the sofa and sat down heavily. "What, why?" "We didn't plan this," she said ruefully, "but Vince and I fell in love. We've been dating for a while now, and we don't want to hide our feelings anymore." "Did you have an affair?" Colin asked stupidly. She glanced quickly at her lover. "We didn't plan this, but at some point we could no longer deny our feelings. Anyway, I already loaded some of my things into the car. I'll be back for the rest later." But, Colin muttered. She ignored his pathetic protest and handed him an envelope, which he didn't even notice. "All the papers and stuff are here. I tried to be as fair as possible in the agreement, but just so you know, I still took half of our savings. Either way, you better show these documents to your lawyer. If there are any objections, he or she can contact my lawyer." I attached her business card to the notice. He stupidly took the envelope, still trying to process what was happening. While he sat holding it, she returned to Vince and took his hand. He stood up, and the two of them moved towards the door. "But why? What?" "I've already explained everything," she interrupted. She nodded at Vince, and he opened the front door. She turned around for the last time. "So I think we're leaving. And Colin, I'm really sorry. I want you to know, it's not about you, it's about me, okay?" Then they left, taking with them all the happiness he had enjoyed for the past 8 years. Colin always considered himself a balanced person. Whenever there was an emergency at work, he was always able to calmly and quickly analyze the problem before deciding what to do next. Today, this ability has left him. His thoughts were chaotic, jumping from one thing to another, not stopping at anything. How could I not notice this was happening? Where can I find a good lawyer? How should I prepare for tomorrow's meeting with Ferguson? I wonder if Celia has prepared anything for dinner. How will I even survive this? His thoughts raced in circles, repeating themselves over and over again, each one demanding attention until he put his hands to his head, trying to silence them. In desperation, he struggled to his feet and headed to the bedroom. He took off his clothes, left them where they had fallen, and then climbed into bed, exhausted. Surprisingly, he soon fell asleep and slept until the next morning. When he woke up, the flow of thoughts died down, but everywhere there was evidence of the new reality of his life. He immediately noticed that Celia was not sleeping next to him, and when he went to get dressed, he discovered that her half of the closet was empty. When he went into the kitchen to make coffee, his footsteps seemed to echo in the empty house. Even as he looked out the window, the morning in North Carolina seemed noticeably darker. Vince Callahan woke up to find Celia staring at the ceiling, her hands clasped behind her head. "What are you thinking about, honey?" he asked. I'm thinking about Colin, she replied. I hope he's okay. He'll be fine, Vince replied indifferently. I hope so, she said. When we left, he looked like he was in shock. I was sorry. You see, he wasn't a bad husband. Everything just somehow became boring, you know. Well, that won't happen to us, he promised. Many adventures await you. With these words, he playfully bit her breasts, and then rolled onto her and began to kiss her passionately. Oh, Vince, yes, she screamed, memories of the passionate night quickly returning. Any thoughts of Colin quickly evaporated in sensual pleasure. For most of the day, the envelope Celia had given him sat on Colin's desk in the office. When he could put off the moment no longer, he opened it and began to read the divorce petition and proposed financial agreement. But it was difficult to concentrate on the dry legalese because he didn't want to get a divorce. What he wanted most was to put his head on the table and cry, but he didn't want anyone in the office to see him like that. After a few minutes, he stood up and slowly walked down the corridor to his boss's office. This woman hired him many years ago, and he considered her his mentor. She looked up at him as he knocked on the door frame, then looked closer. Colin, are you okay? You don't look very good. With a pained expression on his face, he asked, Do you know a good divorce lawyer? Oh, damn, Colin, not you and Celia. Sit down. With these words, the woman stood up and closed the office door. She then sat down in the chair next to Colin and placed her hand on his forearm. Tell me what happened, she asked with obvious concern. This time, Colin couldn't hold back his tears. When Colin finally met with the lawyer his boss recommended, he regretted it almost immediately. The man told him bluntly that the best thing he could do was agree to Celia's terms and not think twice about it. But I don't care how fair her offer is, Colin countered. First of all, I don't want to get a divorce, and I certainly don't want to pay her for leaving me and going to someone else. The lawyer sighed. Look, you need to think rationally. You cannot force your wife to stay in the marriage if she wants to leave. And frankly, you wouldn't want her to stay if all you get is an unhappy wife. As for paying her, you're not the kind to take it from my side. All Celia asks is right. Her name is Celia, is to divide your current assets. She doesn't even ask for alimony. Apparently, she plans to remarry once the divorce is finalized. Listen, I've seen wives lay claim to their husbands' retirement accounts, demand exorbitant alimony payments, and seek most of the marital assets, including the house. Your wife is being reasonable. Don't piss her off so she doesn't start acting vindictively. Maybe so, Colin said stubbornly, but the fact remains, I still don't want a divorce. The lawyer nodded and his tone became more sympathetic. Look, Colin, you shouldn't seek marriage advice from a lawyer. Firstly, I'm not good at this, and secondly, I charge much more for my services than any family consultant. If you're not ready to sign the papers, my advice is to find someone who can help you sort through your feelings. When Colin told his boss about the meeting with the lawyer, she surprised him by handing him a business card. I suspected that you would react this way after our conversation. I think you should go see Dr. Helmer. He is a psychologist specializing in family problems. Several of my friends contacted him, and everyone was delighted. Try it, maybe he will help you. In the third therapy session, Colin was again repeating his complaints when Dr. Helmer interrupted him. Look, Colin, let's be honest. You're stuck. I want you to change direction mentally. You've probably heard of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. People mistakenly believe that these are separate stages that you need to go through sequentially. In fact, they can be intertwined and do not have to be in a particular order. Listening to you, I heard all 5 stages except acceptance. And this is completely normal for a person experiencing what you experienced. But you also said that you are a rational thinker, capable of understanding problems and finding solutions. Here's what you need to do now. Put your emotions aside and develop a strategy that will allow you to move forward. Rationally, you understand that Celia doesn't want to come back. Rationally, you realize that you wouldn't want her back if she didn't want to be with you. Until you can accept these facts, which, by the way, you cannot influence, you will continue to stand still. You need to address life after Celia based on the facts, just as you have dealt with other challenges in the past. Colin sat silently, pondering the psychologist's words. He realized that much of the pain he felt was caused by the unexpectedness of what was happening. There were no warnings, no signs that their marriage was in jeopardy. One day he was a happily married husband, and the next he was headed for divorce. One day he believed that Celia loved him, and the next he found out that she was sleeping with another man. How can I move on if I don't know what's real? And how can I cope with this when I'm bursting with anger? Dr. Helmer listened calmly to Colin's outburst of anger. When Colin fell silent, the psychologist asked, "Have you ever heard of Reinhold Niebuhr?" Colin shook his head. He was a renowned theologian of the 20th century and composed a simple but powerful prayer. God, grant me the intelligence to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is the Serenity Prayer. I heard about it. It's the prayer of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right. Regardless, I think it does a great job of expressing the journey through the stages of grief in a simple and elegant way. This is what you should strive for: calm, acceptance, and wisdom. Until you achieve this, you will not be able to move on. When Colin came out of the session that day, Niebuhr's prayer continued to replay in his head. Calmness is what I want in my life. The question is, how to achieve it? What can I do to find peace of mind? After spending a whole weekend thinking about it, he decided what to do. On Monday, Colin called his lawyer. "I'll agree to anything Celia asks if I can meet her face to face within half an hour." "Are you sure?" asked the lawyer. "I have seen these meetings go disastrously wrong, and they almost never bring satisfaction to either party. This time it will be different, I promise. Organize a meeting." When Colin was shown into Celia's lawyer's conference room, he was surprised to see Vince sitting next to her and holding her hand. However, this is even better, Colin thought. Now Vince and Celia can hear everything for themselves. Celia's lawyer motioned for him to begin, and Colin cleared his throat. "Listen, Celia, this is just as hard for me as it is for you. Everything between us didn't turn out the way I wanted, but that's probably how it happens with many things in life. What happened happened, and now it's time for me to move on. My lawyer told me that your offer was fair and advised me to accept it. In the spirit of getting on with life, I'm willing to do it." He took the pen from the table and signed the agreement with a flourish. As the couple on the other side of the table exchanged a look of relief, he added, "There's just one more thing I want to say." They froze, fearing what would happen next. "I understand that you plan to get married as soon as the divorce is finalized," Colin continued. "So, in the spirit of moving forward, let me wish you all the happiness you deserve in your marriage." With these words, he walked up to the table and shook hands with the stunned Vince. He then leaned over and gave Celia a friendly hug, kissing her on the cheek. As the two lovers watched him leave in amazement, they glanced at each other. "Did this even happen?" Vince asked. Celia shook her head in amazement. "Wow, this is not at all what I expected." Then she smiled. "But it's wonderful. The last thing I wanted was war every time we met him." With the terms of the divorce settled, it was now time for Colin to sell the house he and Celia owned together. Celia was not interested in the house, as she had already moved into a house owned by Vince. Colin didn't have enough money to buy out Celia's share, and even if he did, he knew the house was too big for him alone. Besides, there were too many memories, he decided. The good news was that the real estate market was strong, so selling the house would not be difficult. The bad news was that since Colin and Celia had only bought the house 2 years ago, they had not yet accumulated significant equity, even in a strong market. Ultimately, Colin walked away with enough money to put down a down payment on a 2-bedroom apartment in a nice apartment complex. By the time the old house was sold, the new apartment bought, and Colin moved out, the divorce waiting period was almost over. Colin learned through friends that Vince and Celia had already sent out wedding invitations. Naturally, Colin did not receive an invitation, but he heard that the happy newlyweds would go on a week-long honeymoon in the Caribbean. He planned his actions accordingly. When the tanned couple returned, Vince stepped up. He lifted Celia into his arms to carry her across the threshold. But when he entered the house, he noticed an index card under the door. "Check your back deck," it read. Alarmed, he pulled his new wife to her feet, grabbed her hand, and hurried to the terrace. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, but when he turned to one side, his eyes widened and he gasped. There was a gleaming luxury 3-burner propane grill on the deck, plugged in and ready to go. He turned to Celia. "Did you buy this for me? I've always wanted one, but they're so expensive." "No," she admitted. "I don't know anything about it." Before she could guess anything, she noticed an envelope taped to the gleaming stainless steel lid of the grill. Rushing there, she tore it off and opened it. When she read the card inside, she gasped. "I can't believe it. It's from Colin," he writes. "Congratulations on your new marriage." "Colin gave this to us?" Vince asked incredulously. "If that's what he meant by move on, then all I can say is he's better than me. This is an amazing gift. I will happily cook with it all summer." "I need to call and thank him," Celia said as Vince inspected the grill's functions. When Colin picked up the phone, there was a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and even a hint of guilt in Celia's voice. "Colin, we just found your wedding gift. I can't believe you bought this expensive grill for us. This is too much." Vince liked him. "Did you like it?" He's still on the terrace, drooling. "Great, that's what I wanted. But you didn't have to do that. We didn't even send you a wedding invitation." Colin laughed. "Of course not, that would be too strange. But I was serious. It's time for me to accept what happened and move on. This gift is just my way of showing that I did it. So I hope you and Vince enjoy it." When Celia returned to the terrace to tell Vince, he shook his head in surprise. "Like I said, he's better than me. Well, how about I make some burgers for dinner tonight, Mrs. Callahan?" As April turned to May, Celia and Vince began planning a Mother's Day celebration with Celia's mother. They discussed taking her to a nice restaurant for brunch, but when they suggested the idea, her mother was reluctant. "It's always such a madhouse on Mother's Day. I'd be just as pleased if you just came to my place for brunch." So it was agreed that the newlyweds would bring a special dish, including salmon and vegetables, cooked on Vince's new favorite device. On the way, Celia asked her husband, "Did you remember to buy flowers for Mom?" Slapping himself on the forehead, Vince quickly pulled off the highway and into the parking lot of the local grocery store. Soon he returned with a dozen pink roses. "They're a little wilted," he apologized to Celia, "but it's the thought that counts." Having arrived and taken the dishes to the kitchen, Vince presented roses to Celia's mother with congratulations on Mother's Day. "Thank you, Vince. That's so sweet," she told him. "I'll put them in a vase later." She then invited them to serve themselves in the kitchen and bring their plates to the dining room. "Your father is dying of hunger," she whispered to her daughter. As Celia brought her food into the dining room, she couldn't help but notice the luxurious flower arrangement sitting in the center of the dining table. "Mom, they are just great," she said. "Did your dad give them to you?" The mother giggled. He told me that I was not his mother. Colin actually sent them. Aren't they lovely?" "Colin?" "I know. Isn't that nice of him?" said her mother. Celia nodded, noticing the shadow flicker across her new husband's face. Later, when they were home and Celia had a few minutes of privacy, she called Colin. "Why did you send your mom this bouquet?" she demanded. "Oh, good, they arrived on time. Did they like it?" "Of course she liked them," Celia admitted. "They were great. But why did you send them?" Colin sighed. "Your mother was always very kind to me, and after my mother's death, I felt that I had found someone close to me in her. So I wanted to show my respect to her. I hope there's no problem with that." No, not at all. Like I said, she was very grateful for your concern. I just didn't expect it, that's all. Honestly, I really appreciate it too." "All right, since I didn't make a big mistake, I'd like to ask you a favor." Sure. What are you talking about? It's a little awkward, but I think it's time for me to start dating again. She could almost feel her confusion. Colin, I would feel extremely uncomfortable trying to get you a date. Oh no, nothing like that. I just want to invite someone to my apartment, and to be honest, right now it looks pretty empty, more like a man's den. Can I hire you to decorate it? You've always had much better taste than me. Wow, I didn't expect this, but of course I can do it. I've just finished a big design project, so I can start it right away. When can I come and look around next week? Of course. I currently work from home 3 days a week, so Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday will work for me. Great. I plan to come on Tuesday afternoon. When Colin let her into his apartment the following Tuesday, Celia immediately understood what he was talking about. The walls were painted a dull white, the carpet looked old and faded, and the furniture was mostly stuff he'd salvaged from their old house. I think we have a lot of options, she told him, looking around. Why don't you tell me what style you want? He shrugged helplessly. To be honest, Celia, I don't know anything about style or color theory or anything like that. He looked around for inspiration, then perked up. Actually, I would like you to decorate this apartment so that you like it. He quickly waved his hands. I don't mean anything too feminine, and pink, I definitely want it to look like a normal man's place. But I don't want it to look like a sports bar. He pointed in her direction. Just to make it a place where a woman with good taste would feel comfortable. You're the only one I trust to do this. That's very flattering, Colin. Actually, I think I know what you want. Let me go back to my studio and work on the plan. Then I will contact you and we will choose what you like. Wonderful. Thank you, Celia. I really appreciate it. Over the next 2 months, Celia saw Colin almost every week. They had to choose a design plan, discuss and adjust proposed decorative elements, and then oversee the renovation. After that, she constantly brought samples of fabrics, paint colors, and photographs of furniture for his approval. Colin was pleased with the progress, but Vince had a different opinion. You should see him so often, he complained to his wife when she returned from another visit to Colin's apartment. Honey, I don't see Colin more often than any other client. And then I thought that you had already calmed down with him, especially after he gave us a wedding gift. I think he really left it all behind, she said softly. Yes, maybe. But you and him have a common history, and I can't help but think that he hasn't completely forgotten you. Well, I definitely forgot him. In fact, if you come back to the bedroom with me, I'll show you how much I've forgotten him. Although Celia felt that she had managed to quell Vince's jealousy, she feared that Colin's next request might rekindle her husband's anger. During one of her visits, Colin suddenly asked, Do you still go to the book club? Yes, I'm walking. We meet every second Saturday afternoon. Why? Is this a women's-only club, or would you allow a man to join? I don't know, I don't think we've ever had such a request from a man. Why are you interested? Actually, yes. I told you I wanted to start dating again, but I really don't know what to talk about with women. Most women I know aren't too interested in sports, so we probably won't have a lot of common topics. I think if I knew more about the books my potential girlfriend might read, it would at least give me a reason to start a conversation. She nodded. Okay, I understand. Actually, that sounds pretty reasonable of you. How do you like this option? At the next meeting of our book club, I will raise this issue. If they don't mind, I'll let you know and you can come to the next meeting. If not, I can at least tell you which book we chose so you can read it yourself. I'm very grateful to you, Celia. Of course, I'd rather take part in the discussion and hear what you girls think about the book. But if they don't like the presence of men, I'll read it myself. When Celia raised the issue with her friends at book club, she was pleasantly surprised by their enthusiasm for Colin joining their group. If you don't feel awkward with your ex-husband, we'd love to hear a man's point of view, they told her. Celia was surprised to note that the two single ladies were particularly interested in Colin's participation. At the first meeting, Colin completely won over even those members who expressed concerns. Unlike a couple of the ladies, Colin actually finished reading the book and was able to make some insightful comments. However, he was careful not to dominate the discussion. Celia was pleased to see that Colin was respectful of different opinions and constantly encouraged others to share their thoughts. At the end of the meeting, everyone declared the experiment a success, and Colin was hugged goodbye by all the club members. Celia again noticed that the single ladies were especially ardent in their displays of appreciation. Not only did Colin come to the next meeting, but he also invited the group to host it in his newly furnished apartment. When they arrived, the ladies spent the first half hour oohing and awing about the decor, and Colin was careful to point out that Celia had done it all. According to custom, the host of the meeting was required to provide snacks and drinks. Colin took things a step further by preparing a few charcuterie boards for his guests and a few bottles of Prosecco to keep the conversation moving along. The book discussion that followed may not have been intellectually brilliant, but it was certainly lively. When it was time to leave, everyone was ecstatic with gratitude. One of the unmarried ladies, a sweet young red-haired girl named Kelly, was so insistent in expressing her gratitude that Celia felt the need to pull Colin out, citing urgent matters. When everyone had left, Celia stayed behind, offering to help Colin clean up. He gratefully accepted her offer. After the used plates and glasses were transferred to the dishwasher, he led her to the exit. Taking her hands in his, he thanked her for her help and support in the club. She shook her head. "Actually, I should be thanking you. Everyone had a great time, as you probably noticed, and I think you added a lot to our discussion. I also really appreciate all your compliments on the decor. It was very nice of you." "Please," he replied, "and thank you for saving me from Kelly," he added with a sly smile. She instantly tensed. "You need to be careful around her, Colin. She's a good girl, but she's a little young for you. And from what I've heard, she's a bit of a manhunter, if you know what I mean." He nodded seriously, hiding his surprise at her reaction. Celia's smile returned. "I need to go home, but thanks again for everything." She walked up to him, hugged him, and kissed him on the cheek. Then she stepped back and looked at him carefully. "I think I see another side to you, Colin, and I like it." She kissed him on the cheek again, then turned and walked away. When Vince found out about Celia's new book club member, he became visibly upset and demanded that she tell Colin not to come again. She, in turn, was clearly annoyed. "I won't do anything like that," she replied sharply. "The other girls adore him, and he seems like a great fit for our group. So just stop with these jealous scenes, Vince. Nothing is happening, and you look stupid acting like something is happening." Vince was able to contain his feelings, but that night he felt a strong desire to reclaim his wife. Their lovemaking was unusually intense. Afterwards, she kissed him and thanked him, but when he fell asleep, she slipped out of bed and took the pill. The next morning, Vince regretfully apologized for his behavior, but she brushed off his concerns. "I wouldn't want it to be like this every time," she told him, "but sometimes variety is nice." Reassured, he went to work with a light step. As soon as he left, her forced smile quickly disappeared. As she put on her sundress, Celia found that she was still in pain from the night before and took another pill. She washed it down with breakfast and headed to her design studio to see what was planned for the new week. When she saw that the carpet for Colin's apartment had been delivered, she quickly called him and offered to bring it over. He happily agreed. After making sure her makeup was done, she headed towards his house. When he let her in, she quickly laid the carpet in the designated place. Colin praised her choice and then invited her to stay for a cup of coffee. She readily agreed. However, when she plopped down on the new sofa, she winced, and Colin noticed it immediately. "Is something wrong, Celia?" he asked with a tone of concern in his voice. "It's okay," she said. "Vince was a little aggressive with me last night, and I'm a little sore this morning, that's all." She couldn't help but notice how his face darkened, but soon determination appeared on him. Without saying a word, he moved the coffee table further away from the sofa. He then took the new rug and unrolled it in front of her. Placing a sofa cushion in the middle, he motioned for her to lie down on the carpet. She made a weak attempt to object, but gave in when he insisted. Once she lay face down on the carpet, her hips propped up by a pillow, he straddled her and began massaging her neck, starting at the base of her skull. His fingers kneaded and stroked gently, releasing the tension from her body, and she let out a pleased moan. Then his hands moved to her shoulders and further along her spine, working the muscles. Soon Celia was purring like a contented cat as he massaged her tense back muscles. She was almost ready to fall asleep when she felt him move lower, sliding his hands under her pelvis and lifting it slightly. The effect was amazing. The pain she felt disappeared. After a few minutes, he released her hips and moved to her buttocks. She inhaled sharply as his hands squeezed and massaged her, but before she could protest, he moved lower again. Now he massaged the back of her thighs and gently pressed his thumbs on her calves. A few minutes of this treatment, and he switched to her feet, taking off her shoes and working on the soles and toes. "Oh my God, Colin, this is just divine. I'm melting." He didn't answer. Instead, he lowered her legs and began to slowly work his way up her calves, first pressing on her Achilles tendons, then lightly running his fingers over her skin. He smiled as he noticed her breathing quicken. When his fingers reached the area just above her knees, she felt cool air on the back of her legs. Sluggishly, she realized that he must have lifted her skirt. Now there is no trace of massage left. After a few minutes, he rolled onto his back and Celia turned so she could throw her arm over him, resting her head on his chest. She wanted to say something, but stopped, not daring to voice her thoughts. Instead, she snuggled even closer to him, enjoying the warmth of his body. The silence of their breathing was interrupted by the ringtone of Celia's phone. At first, she decided to ignore the call, but then reluctantly took her phone out of her purse. Seeing who called, she sat down and answered the call. "Hey Vince, what's wrong? Sorry I missed your call earlier, I was busy." "No, I don't have anything right now." "Sure, lunch sounds great, where do you want to meet?" "Okay, I can be there in half an hour. I love you, darling." She turned and looked at Colin apologetically. "Sorry, I have to go." She hurried to the guest toilet and cleaned herself up as much as possible. When she returned, she headed towards the door. But before she left, she turned to him. "We need to talk, I'll call you." Colin nodded in understanding, and she disappeared out the door. Over lunch, Vince began questioning her again about where she had been and what she had been doing, but Celia expanded on her previous excuses. In the end, he dropped the topic. It seemed to him that something had changed in her, but he could not understand what exactly. That night, he wanted to make love to her again, despite her insistence that she was too tired. She managed to take a shower at home after he returned to the office, but she was still afraid that he would find some evidence of her infidelity. However, Colin was so gentle in his caresses that Vince did not find any hints of their meeting. Still, she was glad when he finished and fell asleep. As for Celia, she lay there for a long time, thinking about her morning with Colin. The next day, Colin was busy working on his computer in his home office when his cell phone rang. Checking the screen, he was not surprised to see that it was Celia calling. She begged him to see him to talk, and he invited her to come in right away. After he hung up, he quickly finished the report he was working on for his office, then prepared a text message on his other phone. When he heard the beep from the front door and realized it was Celia, he pressed the send button and then opened the door. When he opened the door, he saw Celia standing there with a worried expression on her face. She walked in, and he closed the door behind her, then turned and looked at her. "Colin, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." She flinched, but he put his fingers to her lips to stop her. She looked at him in surprise until he came closer and replaced his fingers with hers. Lips. "Oh, God," she gasped before kissing him back with equal passion. Their tongues met, and he led her back to the bedroom, unbuttoning her clothes along the way. She was breathing heavily now and began to pull his sweater off, yanking it over his head and tossing it to the floor before she hurriedly reached for his belt. With joint efforts, they undressed in front of each other. Then Colin picked Celia up in his arms and lowered her onto his bed. There was no slow warm-up this time. Vince was working at his desk when he received an anonymous text message on his personal phone. "If you want to know where Celia is, look in Colin's bedroom," it read. "Who is this?" he wrote back, but did not receive an answer. Normally, he would have ignored a message from an unknown sender, but it fueled the paranoia he had been feeling for some time. Grabbing his car keys, he rushed out of the office and rushed to Colin's condominium. Celia wasn't sure what she wanted when she came to see Colin this morning, but now she was only interested in him. Vince came crashing into the parking lot of Colin's apartment complex. Seeing Celia's car, he braked sharply at the main entrance, not bothering to look for a parking space. Jumping out of the car, he saw one of the residents getting out and rushed to catch the door before it slammed. Rushing inside, he paused in the lobby to get his bearings. He then ran up the stairs to the second floor, not wanting to risk Colin and Celia hearing the elevator. Coming out of the stairwell, he walked straight to the door of Colin's apartment. His first thought was to knock down the door with his shoulder, but when he grabbed the handle, it turned easily in his hand. "This fool forgot to lock the door," he thought triumphantly. Sneaking inside, he silently headed towards the bedroom. There was no doubt where to go or what he would find there, for he could clearly hear Celia's moans and screams. Then he watched with pain and fury as she went limp on Colin's chest. "What the hell, Celia?" Vince roared. "How could you do this to me, especially to him?" Shocked, she turned her head to see the person she least wanted to meet at that moment. Vince stood there, clearly hurt and furious, his fists clenched, tears rolling down his cheeks. "No, Vince, no, you have to let me explain." She started, but Vince didn't want to hear anything. "There's nothing to explain, you're a traitor. You broke my heart, I never want to see you again." With that, he turned and staggered out of the bedroom, heading towards the front door. "Wait, Vince, stop. You don't mean it. Just wait a second," Celia shouted desperately as she hurriedly put on her clothes to follow her husband. Colin watched silently as Celia left. Then he got dressed and returned to his office. Noticing the phone with a disposable SIM card, which he had left on the table, he took it and threw it into the trash. "It seems I won't need it anymore," he said to himself. As the phone fell to the bottom of the basket, the last message flashed on the screen. "If you want to find Celia, look in Colin's bedroom." He continued to work when there was a timid knock on the door. Opening it, he saw Celia slowly enter, dragging behind her a large suitcase on wheels. She turned to him, and Colin saw that her eyes were red and her makeup was smeared on her cheeks. "Vince kicked me out," she said bitterly. "How is he?" Colin asked. "He's completely broken," she replied. "One minute he was screaming at me, the next he was crying like a baby. I could barely understand what he was saying. The only thing that was clear was that the sight of me was killing him, and he wanted me to leave as soon as possible." She shook her head. "I'm very worried about him, but I don't know what I can do." Colin nodded. "I know what it is." Then her sad expression changed to a bright one. "But at least now you and I can be together. We don't have to hide our feelings for each other anymore." She raised her arms to hug him, but stopped when she heard his answer. "Don't think." She was puzzled not only by his words, but also by his tone. "What did you say?" she asked. "Actually, you're right, Celia. We don't need to hide our feelings anymore. And my feelings are such that I would not take you back if you were the last woman on earth. I would be crazy to let a cheater into my life again, especially one who cheated twice." She was startled by his outburst, but quickly tried to regain the advantage. "I may have cheated on Vince, but I did it to make up for my mistake by dumping you. Now I am back and will spend the rest of my life showing you how loving and loyal I can be." "Do you really think I'll believe this?" Colin chuckled. "You treat men like interchangeable parts. If you get tired of one, you exchange him for another. If the second one doesn't work, no problem. You just go back to the first one." "It's not fair, Colin. Besides, you yourself wanted me, you seduced me." He nodded sarcastically in agreement. "Yes, of course, I understand. It is enough for any guy to be polite to you, give you a couple of compliments, maybe make a gift, and you are immediately ready to part with your panties. No, it's not like that. That's exactly what it is, and I have no doubt that if I took you back, it would happen again. But I have news for you, Celia. I have seen who you really are. Just like in that song, we will never, never, never get back together. He walked to the front door, opened it sharply, and threw her suitcase into the hallway. Leave, he shouted. Tears streamed down her face, her breath caught in between sobs. Oh God, I can't believe this is happening. Where should I go now? He's scratching Silt hands on chest. If you want my advice, I would suggest you go straight to hell. Celia turned pale at his words and slowly backed away towards the door. Colin quickly slammed it behind her, making sure to lock the bolt this time. He then walked over to the couch and plopped down on it, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from his system. As he began to calm down, he thought about everything that had happened. I wonder what Dr. Helmer would say about all this. In the end, I followed his advice to some extent. I found the wisdom to recognize what I could change and found the courage to make those changes, even if I had to overcome myself at times to do so. But I'll leave the search for acceptance to Vince and Celia. He shook his head. I don't think it will be easy for them to achieve peace of mind. Vince will have to come to terms with the fact that he is a cuckold who will soon be divorced. Celia will have to come to terms with the fact that she is a cheater who has been kicked out of her home and is about to be divorced for the second time. He smiled grimly. Maybe I should suggest the name Dr. Helmer to them. Pleased with himself, he looked around his renovated apartment. Then he returned to his office and sat down at his desk. As soon as he did, his eyes fell on a business card with Kelly's name and number on it. On the back was a handwritten note. Call me someday. He nodded to himself. I think I'm ready to do it right now. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next